So I'm Marina. I'm from the French Greens, and I'm actually I'm sitting in the committee of the European Green Party. And today we wanted to do a session on European democracy and the EU beyond Europe. So today we are discussing a unique political experiment, and the broad question would be how the European Union builds democracy beyond the nation state, and what that means in a time of growing internal and global challenges. So, as you may know, the European Union is not just a set of institutions. It is rather a unique way in the world of making decisions together across borders and through shared rules and democratic processes. But this model is under pressure both internally and externally, and it raises important questions about legitimacy, effectiveness, and political direction. So today, to discuss this subject of European democracy, I'm very pleased to welcome our speakers. So Tetiana Bodum, who represents the Ukrainian Greens. Sorry for the mispronunciation. So she's coming from Ukraine. Marie Toussaint, she's a member of the European Parliament from the French Greens. And Jean Lambert, a former MEP and member of the European Green Party coming from England. So thank you all for being here. And also what I wanted to say is that as we have live French, Spanish, and English translation, please try to speak not too fast. I will also try to speak not too fast, which can be a bit hard sometimes. So maybe the first question would be to ask what is so specific about how democracy works at the European level, and how are decisions made, and what are the gains also of acting together. So I see that Marie is here. So maybe Marie, do you want to start?
I can do it, Marina, if you want. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you. I see that I have a landscape behind me that is not the one I put, but the one you put, but that is really nice. And it really shows the global commitment of the Greens, and it's really quite important. So, as Marina said, I am a French Green MEP. That's why I know Marina quite well. I'm also vice president of the Green Group for a few years now. I was there in the previous mandate, now in the current mandate, with a very much change of tune, right? Because we were in the Green Deal, now we were in the backtrack on Green Deal period. But yeah, I think maybe among the main issues, as an introductory remark, I would say the commitment of the Greens at European level is goes in different dimensions, I would say. We have this ambition of having a strong Green Group in the European Parliament because we want to wait on European institutional decisions. So we currently have a group that is composed of a dozen member states. We do not have yet representation of the Greens in all the member states. That is unfortunate, but we're growing in the number of countries being represented, and we want to be represented everywhere. This means that we need EGP and we need the Global Greens also to help us reach that. On the Council side, we also need to have Green ministers, and we have less now than we had before. And of course, when we have the Green parliamentary people in the European Parliament, ministers in the Council, but then also green members of national parliaments, then we are, of course, stronger because we can really lead the fight, put issues on the table, build with different, I don't know, expertise coming from different member states, decisions, and so on. And this is quite important. And together with many members of the Global Greens, we, for instance, built a global alliance of parliamentarians for the recognition of ecocide, so the crimes against the environment. And I think we've managed a lot by being all together. With a lot of help actually from Ukraine as well. So this is one of the two dimensions. The other dimension is that we believe in the European project as a project of peace and shared prosperity in the planetary boundaries, but we also are in solidarity with each other concerning the fights that we're leading. So even non-member states like Switzerland and so on, we all have kind of similar issues to face with, challenges, right? So we're all trying to fight against climate change. And we've seen that the climate youth movement has organized also at European level. We all fight against, I don't know, asbestos, PFAS, pesticides, of course, and those pollutions cross borders. And also on the social side, well, we also have the same challenges with, I don't know, short-term rentals, for instance, or workers crossing the borders. And being Greens and being European Greens is also about being European citizens as belonging to the same, context and fights. And this is also why we need to and realize each other's expertise and count on the coordination among us to be able to change and shape the European agenda. That's what I would say as introductory remark, Marina.
Thank you so much, Mary, and also for explaining the way you have the European Parliament, but also the Council with minister, etc. So it's a bit complex sometimes to understand really how the decisions are made. Maybe Jean, as someone who served also as a member of the European Parliament a few years ago, what is your view on how decisions are made in the EU? You've heard Marie's thoughts on the issues as well. Are things different today also?
Well, I think they're different in some senses because the political balance has shifted. In the Parliament, I mean, I'm no longer there, but this is what I see and from outside and I hear, with my connections as well with various NGOs. I think that for some people, yes, it looks complex because you're dealing with all this group of member states. It's not the whole of Europe, it's the countries that have decided to join. So you're dealing with them, so you have a decision-making role, as you heard, through the member states at Council. You also have the European Parliament, which does have power and has increasing power. That's certainly shifted since I started in the European Parliament in 1999, a very long time ago, it seems, when, the Parliament was consulted on quite a lot of issues, but now it has real decision-making power. And you can really be involved as a member in making those decisions. So the way in which members act and work with civil society, work with industry, trades unions, other countries is increasingly important, I think. And that raises some questions of transparency, who works with whom, who listens to whom. And of course, we've also seen a couple of scandals recently about who was taking money from whom. A former member of the UK Brexit Party who was being paid by Russia, for example, to sway opinion. So the Parliament is having to sort of come to terms with that. But I think for the public, it can look difficult. They don't know always quite where to intervene or what decisions are made at the European level. I've had journalists say we never quite know when a decision is made at the European level because it takes so long. And you also have national parliamentarians that can be very concerned about what the European Union is doing because they think it's their job as national parliamentarians. And so in some countries, like, for example, my own, the national parliament really didn't want to know too much about the European Union. Thank you. That was over there, out of sight, out of mind. So I think from a transparency, a public understanding point of view, it can be difficult to work out quite what's happening where. But if you're in there, you really feel that, yes, you have power. You are working across border, so it involves compromise. And some political systems, my own, for example, in the UK, still finds compromise a dirty word in many ways. It's, the government, it's the opposition. The European Parliament doesn't work like that. If you're in Germany or other countries, you're more used to that sort of negotiation. So there is some truth, I think, in the fact that it can look difficult to find a way in for those that want it. And I think we still see far too many places that actually don't really want citizens to find their way into the European Parliament, because there are forces there that actually don't want it to operate as democratically as it wants to operate itself. And we can probably talk more about that later.
Thank you very much, Jean, for this answer and this introduction. Tatiana, so for a country like Ukraine, sorry, can you?
Moment. It's okay?
Kindly mute.
Yeah, Tatiana, can you mute and then unmute?
Okay. I have the problem with connection. Sorry, dear colleagues. Do you hear me?
Yes. So, yeah, perfect.
Yeah. I am Tatiana Bodun. I represent the party of Greens of Ukraine, and a country that is currently fighting for its democracy, for freedom and independence against a nuclear armed Russia. This terrible war is not only against Ukraine, but against the entire world. A war of the past and the future, of dictatorship and democracy. After the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine is become clear, the world we knew has changed. International law alone is not enough to protect country. It must be defended with politics, with economics, and sometimes with strength. Today, when we talk about the future of European Union, we are not speaking in theory. For Ukraine, this is about survival, security, and the future of my country. For Ukraine, joining the European Union is not just politics. It's a civilization choice. European integration means Ukraine is finally leaving Russian influence and the post-Soviet way of doing things. The move toward European Association Agreement in 2013 triggered the conflict with Russia. Russia's response to the annexion of Crimea in the war showed the Ukrainian European choice is seen as threat. This is new reality. The European Union role is crucial, but can is more than an economic power. Can it be real politics and security actor? Green politic forces like the European Green Party can play an important part. Many think green politics is only about environment. Today it is about security. Energy is security. If Europe depends on fossil fuels from authoritarian countries like Russia, it lost independence. Renewable energy is not just about the climate. It's about freedom and safety. European Green Party can influence through three key areas: energy independence, foreign policy of values, and European Union strategic autonomy. The Europe is currently the only global player defending world democracy. With the election of the populist Trump by the American, the USA has put on hold its traditional doctrine of establishing world democracy. The European Union is effectively left alone in the confrontation with autocratic regime. The regression in the progress of democracy in the 21st century depends on the stability of European Union. Thus, the Green ideology becomes the avant-garde of the frontier of this confrontation. The Party of Greens of Ukraine is the only party in Ukraine with full membership in European Party. And this is why Ukrainian integration in European Union is important to us. And I want to say thank you for Green solidarity with Ukrainian people, because this is very important for us, Green solidarity. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. And actually, at first I hadn't this question for you, but when I hear Eugene talking about transparency and how sometimes we don't know how decisions are made, when I hear Tatiana talking about the influence of other countries such as Russia, for instance, I would very much like to hear the three of you about how can we protect democracy in Europe from this kind of influence, such as Russia, for instance. So maybe Jean or Mary to try to answer to this question first. So how can we protect the democracy in Europe from the influence of other countries such as Russia? Okay, Marie first, and then Jean, maybe.
Yeah, I'm also happy if Jean begins, but I was okay. I think we have. I will only quote a few and leave for Jean also to complement and so on. But of course, we have this huge influence of foreign actors. But even before, foreign interferences were so fashionable, maybe, I don't know, but present in the public debate, we Greens were pushing for less dependency from third countries. So I just want to point out the fact that we've been fighting for ages against the Russian gas. And you know that when the war in Ukraine exploded, we're still dependent on more than 40% of our gas from Russia. This is crazy. Right now, we can also see how much we depend on oil from other countries. And we also depend on them for our uranium. During the COVID, we saw that we depended on them for masks and medicines. And I could go on and on and on the number of issues where we are dependent from third countries. And one of the first steps to be able to defend democracy in the EU is to reduce drastically this dependency. I can also give you the example in the European Parliament that, you know, a few years ago, maybe you remember it, I think it was talked about globally, but we had this Qatar Gate. Meaning Qatar corrupted some people from within the European Parliament to stop denouncing the violation of human rights in Qatar, especially around the football world game. And they succeeded quite well, actually. The European Parliament denounced, but wasn't that harsh. When we had this Qatar Gate, the justice and the police did their work. They investigated, they imprisoned people. But the European Parliament, the European Commission, did answer to the corrupted people, but did not answer to the corrupter. And right afterwards, the European Commission went to sign very important gas contract with Qatar. That shows a lot, I think, in the way that we can really move forward. And then, of course, we have to legislate even more than we do right now on interferences, especially through social media, but also through official media. I don't know if you've heard, but in France we have different, among the billionaires of the world, among the richest men of the world, we French still score quite a lot, even though the tech people from the US are taking the lead, but still we're quite present. And one of them, Bolloré, is buying so many media, so it's not like in Hungary or in Poland or in Italy, but in France, we do have a billionaire holding most of the media, press, TV, but also books and editions. And if you want to fight against foreign interferences, you also need to defend the democratic press, free press, small press, not only billionaires, because then you depend on their wills and friends and corruption as well. So that's one of the main issues that we're fighting for, alongside with the fight for rule of law. And for instance, in Hungary, the Greens have been leaders for a very long time in the fight for the rule of law. But then I can maybe give the floor to Jean, because she was there when this fight began, and she will be able to tell more about it.
Yeah, I think we would all love to hear about that, Jean. So, what were your experience on that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're looking at the questions around the rule of law, one of the things that we realised within the European Parliament was we had paid a lot of attention to as it were, how countries' state of democracy, state of human rights, various other things before they joined the European Union, particularly in the early 2000s, with what became known as the Copenhagen criteria. We're very fond of naming things after various cities. So the Copenhagen criteria were the standards that countries were supposed to have met before they could join the European Union. But we very quickly came to realize that while we'd paid attention there, we were not paying attention. We were not vigilant about our own member states once countries were in the European Union. We had assumed that we were all right, very complacent. And then we began to see countries such as Poland under particular governments that began to particularly affect the powers of the judiciary and make the judiciary more in line with appointing more, as it were, judges that fitted the government point of view and curtailing the power of judges rather than maintaining their independence. And we also saw in Hungary, for example, the particular measures that started there with sort of attacking, closing the Open University, funded by George Soros originally, attacks on the university, restrictions on the press, that the state media was becoming more an arm of government rather than an independent media funded by the state to inform the public, as it were, impartially, which is always difficult, but, seeing this co-opted, seeing European money disappearing into big vanity projects, and the changes in the electoral law that made it more difficult for a range of parties to stand. All of these things, which I think, we see in many countries. But for the European Union, this was very difficult. So particularly the Civil Liberties Committee began to say, well, we need to look at rule of law. We want to do a special report into Hungary. And the Greens were given that report because the biggest political group didn't want to do it because the Hungarian party was a member of their European party. The Greens often get the cleaning up jobs that other parties don't want to take on, which in a way is good. So we did that first report with Rui Tavares, who is now on the European Green Party committee, Portuguese member. And 3 consecutive reports, those went with the Greens. And I think one of the most shocking things we saw was when Judith Sargentini from the Netherlands went to do her report. She was met in Hungary by huge posters in the streets about how the European Union was coming to, to interfere in Hungary, in Hungary's process. So, the Greens have been the ones that have really tried to hold the line there and to gradually improve measures about the rule of law to check what all member states are doing and to try and uphold those standards, coming under sort of considerable personal pressure and personal threat, which many from the global Greens will recognise in their own countries. Standing up for democracy is not always easy.
Yeah, exactly. I so agree with you. I mean, I feel like the European Union has been built on strong democratic principles and rule of law, and maybe we have sometimes take it maybe for granted, and yet we saw that these principles have been challenged in many countries, such as Hungary, Poland, as you mentioned, but also, as Marie said, not just because this is huge, what's happening in Hungary or even Poland, for instance, but even in countries like France, when you're talking about free and diverse press, it's also part of the debate as well. So maybe Tatiana, because again, Ukraine is still fighting to join the European Union. So, what's your point of view? Because you're at the moment outside the European Union. What's your point of view of this kind of threats on democratic principles and rule of law? Tatiana, can you hear me?
Ein Moment.
Yeah.
Hello. My party is about 35 years, and all the time we are fighting for implementation of ideas of lives of many people and European democratic values in my country. Many of my colleagues today are fighting on the front, and our General Secretary today on front. And we understand in Ukraine, the democratic values is very important for the future in Ukraine, and very important for European Union, because today in Ukraine we fighting for future of European Union. We understand that future in European Union without Ukraine is impossible.
Yeah, so as you just told us that it's, I mean, you have your country fighting for the future of Europe, the future of European Union as well, and for your future as well. So I also wanted maybe to come back to this idea of we saw that yeah, the European Union is built on strong democratic principles and rule of law, and yet it has been challenged in many countries like Hungary or Poland, and we saw that a couple of days ago that we saw a huge change in Hungary. So I don't know if everyone heard about it, because obviously I know that we have a not everyone today maybe is very aware of what's happening in Europe, but to be short, so in Hungary, Orban accepted the defeat a couple days ago. So it was kind of huge. So how do you, Marie, interpret those recent political development there, and do you think they mark a turning point for the European Union?
Well, maybe first to say we were so happy. We were so happy and so relieved, and especially it was a real victory. It was not just a few votes, and then there's a fight, recounting, and accusations of fraud and so on. It was such a victory that Orban had to dismiss right away. This was really important, I think, for the European Union and for all Democrats in terms of hope. And especially, we had Trump and Vance supporting Orban, but we also had our own French far-right people that for now, win in the polls for next year elections, and that we really want to fight back, and they were also friends with Orban. So this was quite important for us as well in terms of impact, to show that this is not the model that people want. This was, of course, and I think Tatiana will tell us that especially, but it was, of course, a good news also for Ukraine, because Hungary and I mean Orban was so close to Russia, that and putting his veto on EU help, so that was really a huge relief. However, we're really cautious, and I think it's now Tineke Strik, Daniel Freund, who have taken over the Hungary battle, and they really call upon us to be cautious, to be careful, because the new leader of Hungary, Peter Magyar, is a former guy of Orban's team, right? So, of course, he has broken up with them. However, they're still quite close in their approach of democracy. So Peter Magyar has quite immediately done some important speeches about about the freedom of the press and democracy and democratical life, which is quite important. But of course, as Jean underlined a bit sooner, the European families of those people want to support them or are afraid of confronting them, right? So there is a huge pressure to give the money back to Hungary right away without waiting for any reforms. But we saw with the Polish example that if we don't keep the pressure quite high, then it's also possible that changes don't really happen. So you can have the beginning of changes, but then the rule of law is still quite not respected, and you still don't really know what happens with equality, with freedoms, with discrimination also of Roma people, of course, in Hungary, for instance, and all these kind of issues that cannot be dealt with in 2 weeks or in 2 months, and even 2 years might be too soon. So we also, as a Green European family, quite push to be cautious and patient also, and to keep the pressure for real changes to happen, and not just because you lost the election, then it's all over. It's not the case. So we will keep on pushing in that direction.
Yeah, so I see that Tatiana wants to
Marie,
take the floor.
yeah.
Maybe, please.
We in Ukraine have a long time best and has been blocking eyes to us in this difficult time for Ukraine war. Now we hope that decision in Europe about Ukraine will not block, and this is very important for us.
Yeah, we also hope that as Orban left, because for everyone else outside the European Union, so it's a bit complicated how the decisions are made about foreign affairs, but you have to get the unanimity. So Orban was he was kind of against European Union and very near Russia, and he put always a vote against everything. So it was very, very difficult. So as Tatiana said, so we hope that now he won't block. Hungary won't block the process anyhow. So. Jean, maybe what's your view on what happened in Hungary, and also what lessons might we learn for European democracy, and maybe a last question on how to keep the pressure, as Marie said.
Yeah, I think it would be very interesting to hear from our Hungarian Green Party, sort of their view on what happened. But I think, looking from what we were seeing a bit from outside was that, that partly it's the way in which political forces that wanted to keep a democratic space open, even if they didn't agree on policy, they have very different views, nevertheless were willing to work together to keep a democratic space open. That was the priority. And I think that that's important. I think also you saw a lot of campaigning out and about in really at the grassroots, meeting people. So not assuming that social media would be your entire messaging. And that ability to be out, to spend time with people, to listen to people, to really make those human contacts, I think also mattered. Because I think there was this feeling that Orban was, the previous leader, was becoming more and more remote and less engaged with people. So I think that willingness for politicians to be out, to meet, to be challenged, was also extremely important. And that, I mean, it's right to say that his successor is not agreed, but there are things there that, which should be supported in terms of what he's saying on the media, in terms of some of the other things. It will be interesting to see what he does on electoral systems and how much, who he starts to appoint to these institutions, which are supposed to be the institutions that the public can trust, to be impartial, to represent them and the public's interests rather than the interests of the government. And certainly within the European Union, money talks. It does in many places, but certainly I think there is this pressure, as Marie was saying, to have money dispensed quickly. I think that needs to be, it's an exchange, if you like, for change. And I think that needs to be quite clear. And I think that one of the other things that this defeat in Hungary has done has also provided a bit of a setback to those on the sort of more extreme right, the hard right, and their backers, not just Russia, but people like Bannon in the United States, and who had a particular model that they are working to, which they have been spreading. And I think it shows that model can be contested and can be beaten at times. And I think that's an important lesson we should be learning too. But cooperation, the personal contacts, the willingness to work together to keep democratic spaces open, I think are important.
Thank you so much. So we saw in this discussion that it's sometimes very hard to fight for democracy even within the European Union. But maybe one last question, because time flies, and I want to keep some time for the Q&A. How can we still also defend those democracy principles, international law as well, and rule of law outside European Union, and especially in a context of crazy geopolitical tensions? I mean, how can the European Union act more coherently on the global stage, and especially in defending international law, and for example in Ukraine or in the Middle East? So maybe Marie to begin with.
Yes, so I can say still that Ukraine might be a bit different than the rest of the world, because it's so close to us, and also because members of the European Union are also being threatened. I'm thinking about the Baltic states. So it's really the front side of the war, right? But what we Greens have been defending is indeed that international law applies and is even reinforced. And this brings those fights and those wars together. Because what we would like to see is the European Union acting as a global leader with defending international law. So with pushing for support to the International Criminal Court, we push a lot in that direction from the European Parliament for speaking up when there are wars. We found the EU quite silent already on Gaza. We think the EU is still quite silent on what's happening now in the West Bank. And of course, we think the European Union is very silent with what's happening now in Iran. But I could also quote Sudan and other global conflicts. To give you one example of this silentness that is quite amazing. Since the European elections in 2024, so the last elections for 2 years now, we've been witnessing a very strong coordination, at least, between the right wing and the far right, which was not traditional in Europe. We had kind of a cordon sanitaire, so it's very much like the word are French, right? But still, it was a custom in the European Union not to work with the far right. And even, for instance, in Germany, the CDU doesn't work normally with AfD. And all of this is changing, both at EU level and national level. They're cooperating more and more. And the first vote on which they were together was a vote on Venezuela before the kidnapping of Maduro, which is why we call this new alliance between the far right and the right wing the Venezuela alliance. So you can imagine then when the kidnapping occurred in January, we were quite reluctant in asking for a text from the European Parliament because they were gathered together to denounce Maduro's regime, which we can agree on, but also to defend the opponents, which we were also reluctant about. So this was quite difficult. This is still a very difficult political context, but we use still every gap that we do have in order to defend international law, ICC, and support ceasefires. And as I told you a bit before as well, defending our strategic autonomy, because this is absolutely key if we want to be able, just even very realistically, to stand up against the dictators. Just to finish with this, 4 years ago, after the invasion of Ukraine by Putin, Ursula von der Leyen made this grandstanding speech in the hemicycle, telling us that from now on, the EU will only sign a free trade agreement or any kind of commercial or political agreement with countries that would respect the rule of law and that would be democratic. Well, this promise has been quite right away abandoned, right? And if you look at Mercosur, for instance, the first country to ratify Mercosur was Argentina with Javier Milei, who is also now attacking the glacier for the mining industry. And yeah, this is really something that we still need to push for as Greens, that, we don't exchange with the entire world without caring for international law, human rights, women's rights, of course. I'm thinking of Afghanistan, above Iran, and all these kind of issues. But count on us to keep defending these ideas.
And I'm sure you will. So, Tatiana, please. Yes.
Yeah. I am agree with my colleague, with my friends. I want to say European Greens Party can today protect the rule of law in independent courts, support free media, and of course promote civic education and critical thinking when we think about future and democracy Europe without autocratic regime.
Yeah, thank you, Tatiana. Jean, maybe on this last question before moving to the Q&A. So Marie was telling us about the European Union being very silent, but do you think that at the moment we we are strong enough and we have the power to act, or do we need more integration so that we can act outside the European Union to defend international law?
I think it's a difficult situation at the moment for the European Union because there isn't a total degree of agreement between member state governments about certain of the international situations that there are. And I think there's a difference of opinion between different governments about how, for example, you handle what's happening in the United States. And I think that the silence on Gaza and the Middle East, I think, didn't surprise me, but it very much upset me because, I think there are things that the European Union could clearly have been saying there and wasn't. So, there is that difference still between national governments, which can make it very difficult to come up with a very strong statement, but nevertheless, there are still principles that I think the European Union could and should be stronger in voicing. But I also think that the EU, it's not just about the particular areas of the world where there's an obvious crisis at the moment, but other places too. And I think there that the issues around the trade agreements that we have and trying to make sure that we keep with, that we uphold those and we uphold our part of those as well. Sorry, I'm still talking our. The UK left the European Union some time ago, but my head is still with the European Union. So, that on trade agreements, on issues around the international cooperation necessary on climate, on biodiversity, on supply chain compliance, the rules for business and making sure that the rules for business are still there. That somebody was making the point in the chat about certain of the European laws that on environment and so on that are there, to continue pushing on those, because those can also be used elsewhere, either as an example of what governments can do or an example of where governments can do better. I mean, it's both things. But I think, to still look at the way in which our international development cooperation works, that all of those sort of things still matter. And, still need to be maintained, because if you want other countries to work with you and to be able to work with other countries, you need trusted partners. And they need to trust you to actually hold to your side of the agreement that you have made and to support them in coming across with what they're doing. So I think the European Union could be much more intelligent in the way it handles its international diplomacy, but that's maybe another question.
Yes, and at the moment we have 3 questions for the Q&A. So what I'm going to do is to ask the 3 questions, and Marie, Tatiana, and Jean, you can answer the question you want. All right? And so we have 10 minutes left, so it's going to be quick. So the first question is, could you please explain a little bit the importance of the Council of Europe besides the European Union? So we owe the code, the European Declaration of Human Rights, its court, and oh no, okay. So maybe just the first part of the text. So could you please explain a little bit more the importance of the Council of Europe besides the European Union? So it's an institution, but not within the European Union, but outside of it. The second question we have is, how can youth participate to sustain democracy in Europe over the long term? So the role of the youth. And the last question I have for you is, I will read. Supposedly we have a democracy in the USA, but the natural word is ignored. Any suggestions on how to get ministers of environment or similar stuff So many of the USA supposedly environmental things, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, are corporate owned. I could go on forever, but I won't. Suggestion, please. Thanks for this talk. Okay, so something about suggestions on how to get ministers of environment in the USA. A question about the role of youth to sustain democracy in Europe, and a last question on the role of the Council of Europe besides the European Union. So, who wants to go first? And you don't need to answer the 3 questions, but you can pick one of these. Yeah, Jean, please.
Yeah. Okay. There are all those sort of questions that you look at and think, right, how long? I'll have a go at the Council of Europe, if that's all right with others. The Council of Europe is an organization which brings together the countries across the whole of Europe, apart from Russia and Belarus. That it is a body which is more based on cooperation rather than working necessarily on legislation in the way that the European Union does. The European Union was founded more to bring together sort of economic cooperation to try and use that as a basis to prevent war in Europe in future, and it's gradually developed from there. The Council of Europe has various organizations within it, one of which is a parliamentarians organization, which will work on policy documents. I think one of the most important things that people may know that's come from the Council of Europe was the declaration, the statements on violence against women, which has been taken up into legislation in many countries across Europe. It's also worked on issues such as statelessness, which is something I work on, and various other things. So it works as parliamentary cooperation rather than, as I say, legislation. And one of the most important things it has with us, I think, from many people's point of view, is it's, as it were, the safeguard of the European Convention on Human Rights, and has a court which will deal with that, where when you've exhausted all your national possibilities, you can take an issue to the European Court of Human Rights, and if they think it's an appropriate case, they will take it up and make a ruling, which states are supposed to abide by and implement, but don't always. So it's different. As I say, it's wider than the European Union. It has a different role, but nevertheless, it's also a place of important cooperation. And it has other dimensions to it, a social dimension that it works on, and so on. So it's different. You will often find a confusion, particularly with the European Court on Human Rights, being treated as if that's something of the European Union. That was done very much in the Brexit debate. And it, is now sort of something which is coming under attack, certainly from the UK and from other places, because of course something that safeguards human rights in that way is a threat to those that like autocracy and repressive regimes. So that's my attempt on that one.
Thank you so much, Jean. I have another question, if it inspires you. So it is, I will read it. So, war is one of the worst contributing factors to the climate crisis and democracy. War is not green. How will Europe demilitarize and become anti-war to deter us from climate collapse? So it's another possibility to answer. So maybe Tatiana, one of these questions to answer, and then Marie to close the session. Tatiana?
Marie, can you report?
Yeah, so there was another question about the role of youth in supporting democracy on the long term, for instance. And there was this last question also about war being contributing factors to the climate crisis and democracy. So you don't have to answer all the question, of course, because we don't have time. But if one of the question inspires you, please, you can answer them. All right. So maybe Marie.
Yeah, I can
Thank you
do
so
that
much.
while I'm not sure that Tatiana's network is so good all the time because of the situation, but I'm picking up on the Council of Europe part just 1 second because I think it's important. But I talked a bit sooner about our fight to recognize ecocide at EU level and the role that Ukraine played, and the Council of Europe was key in that direction because they were working on similar dynamic in parallel to us, but also because the people that we worked with in the Council of Europe were also from Ukraine. So this is a shame, actually, that the European Parliament and the Parliament Assembly from the Council of Europe don't work together that much. But it's quite important to coordinate because, of course, we can find candidates to the European Union in the Council of Europe, and that really helps to move forward. And also the Council of Europe has been pioneer, has been leader in many directions, in many areas, when it came to human rights and natural rights, actually, that we're working on. So it's quite important. I'm not sure I did understand the question on the US and the ministers of the environment, but I want to point out that the recognition of the rights of nature is one key issue that we need to get all around the world. It has begun in the US because some counties in the US do recognize already the rights of nature. And it has also been recognized through the Montreal Global Agreement on Biodiversity. So we really need here again to work all of us together to push for such tools, because once we will have the real recognition of the rights of nature, then we will have a representation of natural elements in every direction of every dimension of decisions, and even in companies now we're testing it. There's a EU initiative, a citizen initiative, waiting for the Commission to be approved, waiting for approval from the Commission. I think we will launch it in the Parliament in the beginning of July. So also to give you this momentum, this next rendezvous, right, to launch it together on the 2nd of July. On youth, yes, we need you. Be cautious on the fact that quite some youth right now vote for the far right. So we really need to be inclusive and try to get all the youth on the democratic and green side of the fight. And this is really a work for us to do all together and for us to support you. And I think that's it. Thank you. And thanks to everyone.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you
And
to our
here,
speakers. Oh, Tatiana, you're back.
yeah.
We
Here
just have like
about
1 minute left.
my
Yeah. So we just
excuse
have
me.
like 1 minute left. So please be quick. Thank you.
I want to say that war is terrible time, of course, and war affects the environment in Ukraine, and we have a very difficult situation today with environment because war. Greenhouse gas emission once. 2. Forest fires and ecosystem destruction. 3. Soil and water pollution. 4. Damage to energy infrastructure, destroyed power plants, the use of more pollution energy source, increases reliance of diesel generators, raise emission too. And very important, ecosystem destruction takes years to recover. This weakens natural climate regulation and biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So it's time to close now. So thank you to our speakers and to all of you for the discussion. So I will give the floor to Alice and Lucy.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, for your excellent moderation, and thank you, Tatiana, Jean, and Marie for your wonderful words today. Okay.